Well, hello and welcome back to the Pastors on Porn podcast. And let me say Happy New Year, or I guess a Happy New Decade. And I'm excited about the year. One of the things a buddy of mine challenged me with a few years ago that I've been practicing at the beginning of the year is to say, Lord, what is an invitation or what is it that you want me to unwrap this year? What are you wanting to say to me as kind of a life or a ministry invitation for the year, and something that's filled with hope and that gives me a sense of something to pray into. So this year I had the phrase that came to my mind, which was the words "open doors," and obviously that means something for my life as I move into this new season of my life, continuing to pastor, but also developing this mentoring podcast and also some of the material I'm working on. So I started to pray open doors, this phrase for my life, January 1st. January 2nd, I took my wife up to Whistler, BC. There was a big Emily Carr art exhibit there, and she loves Emily Carr. Me, not so much. But so I dropped her off, and she goes into the exhibit, and I go to sit in a coffee shop and work on some writing. And on the way there, there's an outdoor bathroom, so I go to get in the bathroom, do my thing, and there's just two stalls there. And so I'm sitting there, I'm going to do my thing, and I hear next to me this guy weeping. I mean, he's bawling, he's crying and sobbing, and I hear him say, I miss my family, I miss my kids. And so I'm sitting there going, no, this is really weird. And so I tentatively say, hey, dude, I'm a pastor. Can I pray for you? What's your name? So he says his name to me, and I'm able to pray for him. And he says, thank you. That was great. And so I finish my thing and get up and leave the bathroom and go to the coffee shop. So I'm not sure if that's open doors or closed doors, if I'm a little bit of a confessional booth thing there. But anyways, so I'm not sure what open doors is going to mean for me this coming year. But if the January 2nd is any indication, there could be some interesting experiences in store for me. Let me also say happy Epiphany Sunday. We just celebrated Epiphany Sunday at our church. Well, when I say we celebrated that, if you actually knew me, you would kind of laugh at me because I'm one of the most non-traditional guys that you can come across. I grew up, other than celebrating Christmas and Easter, that's about my extent of the liturgical calendar. And I've had no background with it growing up, even though I grew up, traditional evangelical. And my wife, who grew up in the Catholic Church, she would talk about Lent, and I'm going, I don't have any Lent on me. She says, no, not Lent. And so I'd always bug her about that. So I have no liturgical background. And so, so apologies to those of you who are from more of a liturgical background, Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, whatever it is, so for me, things like Ash Wednesday, Shrove Tuesday, Maundy Thursday, Pentecost Sunday, Epiphany Sunday, I had no idea what those meant, even up until the last couple years. Now, this is not going to turn into a teaching on the liturgical calendar. I can hardly say that. But I did say to our people, that I've just learned that Christmas is actually not just one day. It's actually 12 days. Everything up to that is just Advent, and after that, there's 12 days of Christmas. And like most people, I was really surprised to find that. And the 12th day heads us towards Epiphany Sunday. And Epiphany Sunday marks, my understanding is, when the wise men travel to see Jesus, and really is all about the revelation of Jesus to the Gentiles, his revelation into a larger world. So happy Epiphany Sunday. And it got me thinking about what this word epiphany actually means. It's interesting because it's actually gone from a Christian word into a word which has been co-opted and used in our culture. The word means a manifestation or appearance. But the way that the world understands epiphanies is kind of a sudden flash of understanding or insight. Some would call it an aha moment. And it's actually, again, a religious word which has been has moved over into popular use. And, obviously in Scripture we see the idea of even that sudden flash of insight playing out. So you have the story of, Paul or Saul at the time, who has a Damascus Road experience. And he says, well, who is this? And it's Jesus. Jesus, reveals himself. This is who you're persecuting me. You have the two discouraged followers of Jesus who have, on the road to Emmaus after the death of Jesus. And suddenly when he's sharing a meal with them, their eyes are open, and they describe it as their hearts were strangely warmed, and they suddenly realize this is Jesus. They have an epiphany. Even in Christian tradition, there is some real examples of epiphanies. After Rome is sacked, you have this author, Augustine, this young man who gets saved, and he writes this book about the city of God, where he describes there's a city of God and there's an earthly city. And he describes that really we are to be about the city of God, where our affections are centered on God rather than an earthly city. Martin Luther has an epiphany. The just shall live by faith. You could say William Wilberforce has this epiphany when he goes from this self-ambitious politician to experiencing God at Easter time, and then he becomes, among other things, a reformer and somebody who works towards the abolition of the slave trade. Martin Luther King Jr., you could describe his epiphanies, where we're judged by the character of our hearts, not the color of our skin. So all of that has to do with epiphanies. So epiphanies are when we have this sudden flash of insight that changes the direction of our hearts and changes the direction of our lives. One of my favorite cartoons, I love Far Side, and in one Far Side cartoon, the cow suddenly stands up and goes, "Hey, we're eating grass." And its whole idea is he's just had an epiphany. So here's a question. Is there an epiphany that we need to have around our struggles with pornography, with unwanted sexual behaviors? Can epiphanies play a role in our desire to be set free and develop a brand new way of thinking and a brand new way of living? I'd actually say that it's necessary. It's crucial. Most, people are aware that New Year's resolutions are so ineffective. And one of the reasons for that is it's simply confusing good intentions for an epiphany. An epiphany is something that happens internally with our mind, with our understanding. It totally reorients our posture. So it's an inside turning out change of directions, as opposed to just this external New Year's resolution, which so quickly falls by the waysides. So what does an epiphany have to do with recovery? I've called this podcast Epiphany Recovery. Well, if we were going to proof text it, we'd probably say the best example of this is the prodigal son. And the prodigal son story, where the son leaves home and he heads to this foreign land, and he's hanging out with prostitutes, great sex addict, and he's partying and living the high life. And suddenly it all falls apart, and he ends, feeding pigs. And one day it says, here's the phrase, he comes to his senses. He stands up and goes, "Hey, I'm eating pig slop." He has an epiphany, and the epiphany is what begins his long journey home. So I think you can definitely see the idea of an epiphany in this addicted man who suddenly comes to his senses and sees a change is needed and begins that journey. I would say every person who is seeking to overcome an addiction needs some sort of epiphany, some sort of change of heart or change of understanding. something where it could be simply that they become sick and tired of being sick and tired. It could be that they realize their present course of behaviors is going to destroy their lives. Somewhere and somehow an epiphany is needed. Now, I'm not here to script that out for you, because I think it can be completely individualized. But I think, there's all sorts of tools we can use, all sorts of things we can learn. But I think along the way, there can be these real mental breakthroughs that result in a real change in course of behavior. Let me give you just a couple examples from my own life. And these are some things that have been epiphanies for me, or things that they may not be so radical, but they change my direction and behavior. When I say an epiphany, for example, you could say that the three wise men, going back to our liturgical calendar, they had an epiphany with the star. But then it began a whole process where they began to move towards Bethlehem. So it certainly wasn't the whole part of the picture, but it started them on their journey. One of the epiphanies I had was that I needed help from somebody who was ahead of me. I realized that in all of my work, and obviously as a pastor, we're always helping people, that I really wasn't progressing. Not that people were holding me back, but I wasn't meeting with anybody who was pulling me forward. So that really resulted in a change in the tactics I used, and really began to get together with people who had experienced recovery themselves, who could act as a Sherpa guide because they had been to the summit themselves. I was always trying to help people, whereas I'd never been to the summit. I was only at base camp 3 or base camp 4, and they weren't even at that point. Here's an epiphany I've just had the last few weeks. When I had this amazing romantic storybook introduction to my dating relationship with my wife. Now, I'd asked her to go out with me a year before. She had turned me down. And a year later, all of a sudden, January 8th, 1984, I still remember the date, she got together with me and says, you know what, I think that I want to be together with you, and I want to say yes. And that was the highlight of best day of my life. And it began this 1.5-year process where I was walking on a cloud. And it is interesting, when I was in that place of passionate romantic love, I never really struggled with pornography, because all of my thoughts and affections were centered on her, and it's like a lot of that stuff fell away. And for me, I've been thinking about that, and so I'm going, how do I rekindle my first love for God so that some of those things that I fall into no longer hold their appeal, similar to that dating type of situation or story. And music has always been really important to me, so I have been spending a lot more time when I go out for a walk every day simply listening to worship music and trying to rekindle my love and passion for God. Recently, I discovered a live worship concert that was put on by Leland, and I think it was, you can find it on YouTube, Leland Live, and the official videos. And me and my wife have been listening to that. Sometimes we go to bed and turn the lights out, and just the last thing before we go to sleep is we play a worship song. When I go out for a walk in the morning, the first thing I do is play a worship song and sing or hum along to it. I must look really strange with my headphones on, but I'm just trying to say, you know what would it look like for me to fall passionately in love with God again? And how would that change my posture towards some of these acting out behaviors? Now, I'm not saying that porn or porn behaviors they'll completely lose their appeal. I mean, that's not realistic. But I want to be so caught up with God's love for me that I have a sense that this doesn't, that is way more important, and all these other things don't compare. So that's an epiphany I'm working on right now. It could be just that you go, you know what, I am so tired of what this does to me. I want a new course in life. It could be you might have a vision of where your life will end up, 3, 4, 5 years from now. One of the questions I ask when I'm mentoring people is describe your life 3 to 5 years from now if you take no change, no remedial actions, or you don't begin to deal with this. And it could be just that you get a vision of your future. So what is the epiphany that you need in terms of walking away from some of these embedded behaviors in your life? I really pray that 2020 will be a year of epiphanies for you. And not only do you experience freedom, but you experience open doors to begin to live out God's heart and God's desire for your life. Happy 2020.